Hagar, an Egyptian servant of Sarai, later known as Sarah, was caught in a situation that many could relate to, feeling abandoned and overlooked. Sarai, who had no children, had grown desperate and frustrated. She suggested to her husband, Abram, later known as Abraham, that he should take Hagar as a secondary wife to bear a child for her. In this patriarchal society, it was common for a wife to give a servant to her husband to have children in case she was unable. Sarai hoped that through Hagar she could experience motherhood. Hagar became pregnant, and as soon as she realized she was carrying a child, she began to look at Sarai with disdain. Sarai's barren womb and Hagar's pregnancy led to conflict. Sarai, feeling disrespected by her servant, began to mistreat Hagar. The tension between the two women escalated to the point where Hagar fled into the desert, unable to bear the harsh treatment. In her distress, Hagar ran away into the desert. Alone, pregnant, and abandoned, she felt utterly lost and hopeless. The wilderness was a place of isolation, where she would face danger without the protection of Abram or Sarai. Yet, God had not forgotten her. In the middle of her despair, God's presence reached out to Hagar. The angel of the Lord found her beside a spring of water in the desert, near the road to shore. When the angel appeared, Hagar was likely overwhelmed. The angel asked, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" Hagar, in her pain, admitted that she was running away from her mistress, Sarai. The angel then gave her a command to return to Sarai and submit to her, but with a promise that God would bless her. The angel told Hagar that her descendants would be too numerous to count, and she would bear a son named Ishmael, meaning God hears. This was God's response to Hagar's cry. As Hagar listened to the angel's words, she realized something profound. She was not abandoned. She was seen by God. She declared, "You are a God who sees me," naming God El Roi, meaning the God who sees. Hagar's declaration of faith came from the deep understanding that God had noticed her in her suffering. She had been overlooked by her mistress, Sarai, and her situation seemed hopeless. But God had seen her, heard her cry, and given her a promise. Hagar, now filled with a renewed sense of purpose, obeyed the angel's command and returned to Sarai. She gave birth to a son, whom Abram named Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Though Hagar's life would still be difficult, she had received a glimpse of God's plan for her. God had seen her pain, heard her cry, and made a promise of blessing. After Ishmael was born and Hagar had returned to Sarai's household, life carried on, though not without tension. Years passed and Sarai, now Sarah, eventually gave birth to Isaac, the promised child. As the two boys grew older, a conflict arose. Ishmael, as an older child, began to mock Isaac, causing Sarah to be distressed and concerned about the inheritance of Isaac. Sarah, who had already struggled with infertility and had witnessed God's miraculous provision of Isaac, was now faced with the reality of having another child in the household who seemed to pose a threat to the promise. In a moment of frustration, Sarah told Abraham that she wanted Hagar and Ishmael to leave. Abraham was distressed by this request, as Ishmael was also his son. But God spoke to Abraham, reassuring him that Sarah's request was in accordance with his plan. God told Abraham not to be distressed and assured him that Ishmael would be taken care of and blessed, as he was still Abraham's son. In obedience to God's command, Abraham provided provisions for Hagar and Ishmael and sent them away. Hagar, once again in a place of desperation, was forced to leave with her son. This time, however, she found herself alone in the wilderness once more, without the protection and security she had briefly known. Hagar and Ishmael wandered in the desert of Beersheba, running out of water and facing the harshness of the wilderness. As they approached the brink of death from thirst, Hagar, in her agony, placed Ishmael under a bush and stepped away, not wanting to see her son die. In this moment of despair, Hagar cried out to God, knowing that once again she was at the end of her strength. In her darkest moment, God heard her cry. The angel of God called to her from heaven, asking her not to be afraid and reminding her of his promise to make Ishmael a great nation. God opened Hagar's eyes and she saw a well of water nearby. She quickly filled her flask and gave water to her son. Once again, God had not abandoned her, but had provided for her and Ishmael in their need. God's faithfulness to Hagar did not end there. He reaffirmed his promise to her that Ishmael would become the father of a great nation. Hagar and Ishmael were given a new direction and hope for the future. God watched over them, and Ishmael grew up to live in the wilderness, eventually becoming an archer. Hagar's story, though marked by hardship, is one of God's unceasing care and promise of blessing. Hagar's story serves as a continual reminder of God's faithfulness, even in moments of abandonment and struggle. Just as God saw Hagar when she was in the wilderness before, He saw her again when she was cast out. He continued to provide for her, demonstrating that His eye is always on us, even in our darkest moments. The story of Hagar is not just about her struggles. It's a powerful reminder of the God who sees us in our darkest moments. Hagar, an Egyptian servant, was not just a woman with a child. She was an outcast, abandoned and mistreated. Yet God reached out to her in her despair. He saw her and responded. This is the God we serve, El Roi, the God who sees. Key lessons from Hagar's story: God sees your situation. No matter how isolated, forgotten, or rejected you may feel, God sees you. Hagar's story shows that even in the wilderness, God knows. He is not far away, nor is He indifferent to our pain. When Hagar cried out in distress, God heard her, and when we call on Him, He hears us too. God hears your cry. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. Psalm 34-19. Just as God heard Hagar's cry, He hears ours. In moments of affliction, when it feels like no one else understands, God is listening. He sees your tears, knows your heart, and is ready to respond. You are not too far gone for God to see you. Hagar's situation seemed hopeless. She had been rejected, mistreated, and left alone in the desert. But God saw her. You are never too far from God's reach. No matter how deep your pain or how far you feel from Him, God is El Roi. He sees you right where you are, and He is ready to intervene in your life. Draw near to El Roi. The key lesson from Hagar's encounter with God is to draw near to the one who sees you. Hagar, in her desperation, encountered God's presence and understood that she was not alone. Just as God spoke to Hagar in her darkest moment, He speaks to us. When you feel unseen, call out to El Roi. He is near, He hears, and He will answer. God's provision is constant. Just as God provided water in the wilderness for Hagar and Ishmael, He continually provides for us, even when it seems like there is no way forward. God sees the whole picture and knows exactly what we need. God keeps His promises. Despite the challenges Hagar faced, God's promise to her was fulfilled. Ishmael became the father of a great nation, showing that God's plans are never thwarted by our circumstances. God is with us in every season. Whether in moments of joy or in times of pain, God is with us. Hagar's story reminds us that even when we are cast out, God is still watching over us. He sees us, hears our cries, and will guide us through the wilderness. Conclusion: Hagar's journey is a powerful testament to the God who sees us, El Roi. From her time as a servant in Sarai's household to her moments of abandonment and despair in the desert, God remained faithful to her. Even when she was cast out, God saw her and continued to provide for her and her son. Hagar's story reminds us that no matter the circumstances, we are never alone. El Roi, the God who sees, is always watching over us, hearing our cries, and fulfilling His promises in our lives. What God cannot do does not exist. Thank you for watching our channel, The Eternal Word of God. Share your insights, thoughts in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more Bible stories.